Question 1. During the evaluation of a potential crime scene in Atlanta, Georgia, an officer observes an individual exhibiting nervous behavior and attempting to discreetly conceal an object in their pocket. The officer has a reasonable suspicion that the individual may be involved in criminal activity and that the concealed object might be evidence. However, the officer does not have probable cause to arrest or search the individual at this precise moment, nor are there immediate circumstances indicating the evidence will be destroyed if not acted upon instantly. What is the most appropriate course of action for the officer? Option A. Detain the individual indefinitely while attempting to locate a supervisor to determine the next steps, as the situation is unclear. Option B. Secure the immediate area to preserve potential evidence, and then proceed to gather further information and establish probable cause to seek a warrant for a search if necessary. Option C. Immediately search the individual's pocket to seize the concealed object, as the nervous behavior and concealment suggest potential evidence. Option D. Allow the individual to leave the scene to avoid any potential accusations of unlawful detainment or search, even if it means losing potential evidence. The correct answer is B. Secure the immediate area to preserve potential evidence, and then proceed to gather further information and establish probable cause to seek a warrant for a search if necessary. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate need for information with the fundamental rights of an individual and the legal procedures governing law enforcement. The officer must act ethically and within the bounds of Georgia law, specifically concerning the rights of individuals encountered during an investigation. The urgency of the situation, coupled with the potential for evidence to be lost, creates pressure to act quickly, but this must not override established legal and ethical protocols. The best approach involves prioritizing the preservation of potential evidence while respecting the individual's rights and adhering to proper legal procedures. This means securing the scene to prevent contamination or destruction of evidence, and then initiating the legal process to obtain the necessary authorization to search the individual or their belongings. This approach is correct because it upholds the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, as interpreted by Georgia law, which protects individuals from unreasonable searches and seizures. Obtaining a warrant based on probable cause is the standard legal mechanism for conducting a search when consent is not freely and voluntarily given, or when exigent circumstances do not clearly exist. This ensures that law enforcement actions are justified and subject to judicial oversight, thereby protecting civil liberties. Failing to secure the scene and immediately searching the individual without probable cause or a warrant would be a significant ethical and legal failure. This violates the principle of due process and could lead to the suppression of any evidence found, rendering it inadmissible in court. It also undermines public trust in law enforcement by suggesting a disregard for individual rights. Another incorrect approach would be to delay the investigation significantly to obtain a warrant when there is a clear and immediate threat of evidence destruction. While warrants are crucial, Georgia law, like federal law, recognizes exigent circumstances that may permit a search without a warrant if there is probable cause to believe that evidence will be immediately destroyed. However, this scenario does not explicitly present such an immediate threat that would justify bypassing the warrant process entirely without further justification. Finally, abandoning the investigation due to a perceived lack of immediate options would be professionally unacceptable, as it fails to uphold the duty to investigate potential criminal activity. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with assessing the situation for immediate threats to life or safety. If none exist, the next step is to evaluate the presence of probable cause and the potential for exigent circumstances that would justify a warrantless search. If neither is clearly present, the priority shifts to securing the scene and initiating the process to obtain a warrant. Throughout this process, officers must remain mindful of the individual's rights and the legal standards governing their actions in Georgia. Question 2. What factors determine the appropriate procedure for an Atlanta Police Department officer to follow when encountering an individual who appears to be in distress and may possess information relevant to an ongoing investigation? Option A. The individual's immediate safety and well-being, followed by a clear articulation of their constitutional rights if they are in custody or their freedom is restrained before any questioning. Option B. The urgency of obtaining information for the investigation, regardless of the individual's immediate condition or constitutional protections. Option C. The officer's personal assessment of the individual's guilt or innocence, influencing the level of questioning and the need for rights advisement. Option D. The potential for the individual to flee or resist, dictating immediate apprehension and interrogation without prior rights advisement. Correct answer is A. The individual's immediate safety and well-being, followed by a clear articulation of their constitutional rights if they are in custody or their freedom is restrained, before any questioning. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an Atlanta Police Department, APD, officer to balance the immediate need for information with the fundamental rights of an individual and the integrity of an investigation. The officer must exercise careful judgment to avoid compromising evidence, violating constitutional rights, or creating a situation that could be detrimental to the investigation or the individual's legal standing. The best professional approach involves prioritizing the immediate safety and well-being of the individual while simultaneously initiating a lawful process to gather necessary information without coercion. This means ensuring the individual is not in immediate danger, then clearly informing them of their rights, including the right to remain silent and the right to legal counsel, before asking any questions that could elicit an incriminating response. This approach respects the individual's constitutional protections under the Fourth and Fifth Amendments of the U.S. Constitution, as interpreted by landmark Supreme Court cases like Miranda v. Arizona. It ensures that any information obtained is admissible in court and upholds the APD's commitment to lawful and ethical policing. An incorrect approach would be to immediately interrogate the individual without informing them of their rights, especially if they are in custody or their freedom of movement is restrained. This directly violates the Miranda warnings requirement and could lead to the suppression of any statements made, thereby jeopardizing the investigation. Another incorrect approach would be to ignore the individual's potential distress or need for assistance in favor of solely focusing on gathering information, as this neglects the duty of care and could lead to further harm or complications. Finally, attempting to coerce or pressure the individual into speaking by implying negative consequences for remaining silent is unethical and illegal, undermining the principles of due process and fair treatment. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with assessing the immediate situation for safety concerns. If no immediate danger exists, the next step is to determine if the individual is in custody or has been detained in a manner that triggers Miranda rights. If so, those rights must be clearly articulated before any questioning. If the individual is not in custody, the officer can engage in consensual conversation, but must be mindful of not creating a de facto arrest situation. Throughout the interaction, maintaining professionalism, respect for individual rights, and adherence to departmental policy and constitutional law are paramount. Question 3. System analysis indicates that an Atlanta Police Department APD officer is approached by a colleague from another precinct who is working on a case. The colleague asks for specific, non-public details about a witness interview conducted by the officer's unit, stating it might help their investigation. The officer knows this information is sensitive and not typically shared without explicit authorization. What is the most ethically sound and procedurally correct course of action for the APD officer? Option A. Provide the requested information to the colleague, believing it might assist in a broader investigation and foster interdepartmental cooperation. Option B. Politely decline to provide any information, stating that they are not authorized to share such details, and then avoid further discussion on the matter. Option C. Inform their immediate supervisor about the colleague's request and seek guidance on whether and how to proceed, adhering strictly to APD policy and the Georgia Post Code of Ethics. Option D. Offer vague, general information that might be helpful without revealing any specific details from the interview, hoping to assist without violating policy. The correct answer is C. Inform their immediate supervisor about the colleague's request and seek guidance on whether and how to proceed, adhering strictly to APD policy and the Georgia Post Code of Ethics. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a desire to assist a colleague and the strict adherence to departmental policies and the Georgia Peace Officer Standards and Training Council, Post Code of Ethics. The officer must navigate the potential for perceived favoritism or compromise of investigative integrity against the backdrop of maintaining professional relationships. Careful judgment is required to ensure that all actions align with legal mandates and ethical standards, thereby preserving public trust and the integrity of the Atlanta Police Department APD. The best professional approach involves a direct and transparent communication with the supervisor regarding the request. This approach upholds the principle of accountability and ensures that any potential conflict of interest or deviation from standard procedure is reviewed and approved by the appropriate authority. By informing the supervisor, the officer demonstrates respect for the chain of command and allows for an objective assessment of the situation, ensuring that departmental policy is followed and that no investigative compromise occurs. This aligns with the APD's commitment to ethical conduct and the Georgia Post Code of Ethics, which emphasizes integrity, impartiality, and adherence to law and policy. An incorrect approach would be to directly provide the requested information to the colleague without supervisor approval. This action bypasses established protocols and could be construed as a breach of confidentiality or an attempt to influence an investigation, violating the Georgia Post Code of Ethics regarding impartiality and the proper handling of information. Another incorrect approach would be to ignore the request entirely without any communication. While this avoids direct involvement, it can damage professional relationships and may be perceived as uncooperative. More importantly, it fails to address the potential ethical implications or to seek guidance from a supervisor, which is a critical component of professional decision-making in potentially sensitive situations. A further incorrect approach would be to subtly hint at the information without directly providing it. This is ethically dubious as it attempts to circumvent policy through indirect means, potentially leading to misunderstandings or unintended consequences, and still fails to involve the necessary supervisory oversight. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes transparency, adherence to policy, and seeking supervisory guidance when faced with requests that could potentially compromise ethical standards or departmental procedures. This involves 1. Identifying the potential ethical or policy conflict. 2. Consulting relevant departmental policies and the Georgia Post Code of Ethics. 3. Communicating the situation and the request to a supervisor for direction. 4. Acting only upon explicit approval and guidance from the supervisor. Question 4. Benchmark analysis indicates that an Atlanta Police Department APD officer, while on patrol in Fulton County, Georgia, encounters an individual they know personally from a community youth sports league. The individual is subsequently identified as being involved in a minor traffic infraction. The officer is aware that the individual has had recent financial difficulties. What is the most ethically sound and procedurally correct course of action for the officer? Option A. Immediately report the personal relationship to their direct supervisor and request to be reassigned from further involvement in the investigation or citation of the individual. Option B. Proceed with issuing a citation for the traffic infraction, but subtly omit details that might lead to a more severe penalty, believing personal discretion is warranted. Option C. Immediately dismiss the traffic infraction, citing a lack of sufficient evidence to avoid any potential conflict of interest or appearance of impropriety. Option D. Conduct a thorough investigation of the traffic infraction and issue a citation, but refrain from mentioning the personal acquaintance to anyone, assuming it will not influence their judgment. The correct answer is A. Immediately report the personal relationship to their direct supervisor and request to be reassigned from further involvement in the investigation or citation of the individual. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a sworn duty to uphold the law and the potential for personal relationships to influence professional judgment. The Atlanta Police Department, APD, operates under the Georgia Peace Officer Standards and Training Post Council Code of Ethics and Conduct, which mandates impartiality, integrity, and avoidance of conflicts of interest. The core of the dilemma lies in balancing the need for thorough investigation with the personal connection to the individual involved. The best professional approach involves immediate and transparent disclosure of the personal relationship to a supervisor. This action upholds the principle of integrity by acknowledging the potential for bias and allowing for objective oversight. By informing a supervisor, the officer ensures that the investigation can proceed without the appearance or reality of impropriety, thereby protecting the integrity of the APD and the justice system. This aligns with the Post Code of Ethics requirement to avoid situations that could compromise professional judgment or bring discredit to the department. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the investigation without disclosing the relationship, believing personal objectivity can be maintained. This fails to recognize the appearance of impropriety, which can be as damaging as actual bias. It violates the Post Code of Ethics by not acting with integrity and potentially compromising the impartiality of the investigation. Another incorrect approach is to attempt to subtly steer the investigation away from incriminating evidence or to downplay the severity of the offense. This constitutes a direct breach of duty and a violation of the Post Code of Ethics, specifically the clauses related to upholding the law and acting with honesty and fairness. Such actions undermine public trust and can lead to wrongful acquittals or convictions. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to immediately dismiss the individual's involvement without any further investigation due to the personal relationship. This is a dereliction of duty and a failure to uphold the law. It demonstrates a lack of integrity and impartiality, directly contravening the core principles of law enforcement as outlined by the Post Council. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes transparency, integrity, and adherence to departmental policy and ethical codes. When a potential conflict of interest arises, the immediate step should be to identify the conflict, assess its potential impact on professional duties, and then report it to the appropriate authority for guidance and reassignment if necessary. This proactive approach safeguards both the individual officer's integrity and the reputation of the department. Question 5. Strategic planning requires officers to anticipate potential ethical conflicts. Officer Miller, an Atlanta Police Department officer, learns that a close personal friend is being investigated for a potential misdemeanor offense within APD's jurisdiction. Officer Miller has not been assigned to the case, but is aware of the general nature of the investigation through departmental channels. What is the most ethically sound and professionally responsible course of action for Officer Miller to take? Option A. Discreetly gather additional information about the investigation through unofficial channels to assess the severity of the situation before deciding whether to report it. Option B. Proceed with their duties as usual, exercising extra caution to ensure their personal relationship does not influence their professional judgment, without reporting the situation. Option C. Immediately report the potential conflict of interest to their supervisor and request to be recused from any involvement in the investigation, even if not formally assigned. Option D. Discuss the investigation with their friend to understand their perspective and offer support, assuring them that their personal connection will ensure fair treatment. The correct answer is C. Immediately report the potential conflict of interest to their supervisor and request to be recused from any involvement in the investigation, even if not formally assigned. Explanation. Strategic planning requires careful consideration of ethical implications, especially when dealing with sensitive information and public trust. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Officer Miller is caught between a personal relationship and their official duties, creating a conflict of interest. The need for impartiality and the protection of confidential information are paramount in law enforcement. The best approach involves Officer Miller immediately reporting the potential conflict of interest to their supervisor and recusing themselves from any involvement in the investigation. This is correct because it adheres to the Atlanta Police Department's APD Code of Conduct, which mandates officers to avoid situations that could compromise their objectivity or create the appearance of impropriety. By reporting and recusing, Officer Miller upholds the principles of integrity and accountability, ensuring that the investigation proceeds without bias and that public trust in the APD remains uncompromised. This action prioritizes departmental policy and ethical standards over personal connections. An incorrect approach would be for Officer Miller to proceed with the investigation while attempting to be extra careful not to let their personal relationship influence their actions. This is professionally unacceptable because even with the best intentions, the appearance of bias is unavoidable. It violates the APD's policy on conflicts of interest and erodes public confidence, as citizens may perceive preferential treatment or a lack of thoroughness due to the personal connection. Another incorrect approach would be for Officer Miller to ignore the situation and continue with the investigation as if nothing were amiss. This is a severe ethical and regulatory failure. It demonstrates a disregard for departmental policies designed to ensure fairness and impartiality, and it directly compromises the integrity of the investigation. Such inaction can lead to accusations of misconduct and damage the reputation of both the officer and the APD. Finally, an incorrect approach would be for Officer Miller to discuss the case details with their friend, believing they are helping by providing context or reassurance. This is a critical breach of confidentiality and departmental policy. Law enforcement officers are entrusted with sensitive information, and its disclosure, even to someone perceived as a friend, is a violation of privacy laws and APD regulations, potentially jeopardizing the investigation and leading to disciplinary action. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to departmental policy and ethical codes. When faced with a potential conflict of interest, the immediate steps should be to identify the conflict, consult relevant policies, report the situation to a supervisor, and recuse oneself from any involvement. This systematic approach ensures that decisions are made with integrity, transparency, and in accordance with the law and ethical standards. 6. Operational review demonstrates that Officer Miller, while on patrol in Atlanta, Georgia, observes a vehicle speeding. Upon approaching the vehicle, Officer Miller recognizes the driver as a close personal friend from outside of work. The driver also acknowledges Officer Miller. Officer Miller is now faced with a decision on how to proceed. Which of the following represents the most ethically sound and professionally responsible course of action for Officer Miller? Option A. Immediately inform their supervisor of the situation and request to be removed from any further involvement in the traffic stop and potential citation. Option B. Engage in a brief, friendly conversation with the acquaintance, issue a minor citation for a less serious infraction, and then allow them to leave. Option C. Conduct the traffic stop as usual, but omit any mention of recognizing the driver as a personal acquaintance in the official report. Option D. Proceed with the traffic stop, issue a verbal warning to the friend, and do not mention the personal relationship in any official report. The correct answer is A. Immediately inform their supervisor of the situation and request to be removed from any further involvement in the traffic stop and potential citation. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Officer Miller is faced with a direct conflict between a personal relationship and their official duty to uphold the law and maintain public trust. The integrity of the Atlanta Police Department, APD, and the perception of fairness in law enforcement are at stake. The situation requires careful judgment to ensure that departmental policies and ethical standards are met, preventing any appearance of impropriety or favoritism. The best professional approach involves Officer Miller immediately reporting the situation to their supervisor and recusing themselves from any involvement in the investigation or enforcement related to their acquaintance. This approach is correct because it adheres to fundamental principles of ethical policing and departmental integrity. Specifically, it aligns with APD's internal affairs policies and the broader ethical code for law enforcement officers, which mandate impartiality, avoidance of conflicts of interest, and transparency in reporting potential ethical breaches. By stepping aside, Officer Miller upholds the principle that all individuals should be treated equally under the law, regardless of personal connections, and preserves the department's reputation for fairness. An incorrect approach would be for Officer Miller to proceed with the traffic stop and issue a warning without reporting the acquaintance. This is professionally unacceptable because it creates a clear conflict of interest. Officer Miller is using their official authority in a situation where personal bias could influence their decision-making, potentially leading to a less stringent outcome than warranted by the observed violation. This undermines public trust and violates the APD's policy on conflicts of interest and professional conduct. Another incorrect approach would be for Officer Miller to ignore the acquaintance and proceed with the stop as if they were a stranger, but then fail to document the personal connection in their report. This is also professionally unacceptable. While it might seem like an attempt to be impartial, the failure to disclose the relationship is a breach of transparency and honesty. It conceals a potential bias that could have influenced the stop or the subsequent actions, and it prevents supervisors from properly assessing the situation and ensuring departmental standards were met. This violates APD's reporting requirements and ethical obligations. A final incorrect approach would be for Officer Miller to engage in a casual conversation with the acquaintance during the stop, downplaying the seriousness of the infraction, and then letting them go with only a verbal caution, again, without reporting the connection. This is professionally unacceptable as it constitutes an abuse of discretion influenced by a personal relationship. It demonstrates favoritism and a failure to enforce traffic laws consistently, which erodes public confidence in the APD's commitment to equal enforcement. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear understanding of departmental policies on conflicts of interest, ethics, and reporting. Officers should be trained to recognize situations where personal relationships could compromise their professional duties. When such a situation arises, the immediate step should be to identify the conflict, report it to the appropriate authority, usually a supervisor, and recuse oneself from any action related to the conflict. Transparency and adherence to established procedures are paramount to maintaining integrity and public trust. Question 7. Compliance review shows that an Atlanta Police Department APD Officer Miller observed a brief, informal interaction between a fellow officer, Officer Davis, and a civilian known to have a history of minor offenses. Officer Miller overheard a portion of the conversation where the civilian made a statement that could be interpreted as an offer of information in exchange for leniency on an unrelated minor infraction. Officer Miller did not witness any exchange of money or contraband. Officer Davis later mentions to Officer Miller that he is concerned about the interaction, as he is currently under internal investigation for a separate matter and fears this interaction might be misconstrued. Officer Miller is asked to provide a written statement regarding his observations of the interaction between Officer Davis and the civilian. What is the most appropriate course of action for Officer Miller? Option A. Refuse to provide a written statement, citing a desire to avoid any involvement in a matter that could negatively affect a fellow officer. Option B. Omit the civilian's statement from the written report, focusing only on the fact that an interaction occurred to avoid potentially complicating Officer Davis's situation. Option C. Provide a detailed and factual written statement of exactly what was observed and overheard, including the civilian's statement and the context of the interaction, without embellishment or omission. Option D. State in the written report that Officer Davis was merely having a brief, routine conversation with the civilian and that nothing of consequence was observed. The correct answer is C. Provide a detailed and factual written statement of exactly what was observed and overheard, including the civilian's statement and the context of the interaction, without embellishment or omission. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a desire to assist a colleague and the absolute requirement to maintain the integrity of an official investigation. The pressure to help out a fellow officer, especially one facing potential disciplinary action, can be significant. However, the duty to uphold the law and the internal investigative process of the Atlanta Police Department, APD, takes precedence. Misrepresenting facts or withholding crucial information, even with good intentions, can have severe consequences, including compromising the investigation, undermining public trust, and leading to personal disciplinary action for all involved. The best professional approach involves a commitment to truthfulness and adherence to APD policy regarding internal investigations. This means accurately documenting all observations and interactions, regardless of personal feelings or perceived fairness of the situation. Specifically, it requires reporting the observed interaction with the civilian without embellishment or omission, even if it might negatively impact the colleague. This aligns with the APD's commitment to impartial and thorough investigations, ensuring that all personnel are held to the same standards of conduct and that investigations are based on factual evidence. The ethical imperative is to serve justice and maintain departmental integrity above personal loyalty. Failing to accurately report the interaction, by omitting the civilian's statement or downplaying the interaction, constitutes a serious ethical and regulatory failure. This misrepresentation directly obstructs the investigative process and violates the APD's policy on truthful reporting. It can be construed as an attempt to shield a colleague from accountability, which is a breach of duty. Another incorrect approach would be to directly lie about the interaction, fabricating a different account of events. This is not only an ethical violation, but also a potential criminal offense. Depending on the nature of the false statement and its impact, it fundamentally undermines the trust placed in APD officers and the investigative process. A third incorrect approach involves refusing to provide any statement, citing a desire to avoid implicating a colleague. While this might seem like a way to avoid direct falsehood, it is still a failure to cooperate with a legitimate internal investigation and can be interpreted as an admission of wrongdoing or an attempt to obstruct justice. APD policy mandates cooperation with internal investigations. The professional decision-making process in such situations should be guided by a clear understanding of APD policies and procedures, particularly those concerning conduct, reporting, and internal investigations. Officers should prioritize their sworn duty to uphold the law and departmental integrity. When faced with a conflict between personal loyalty and professional obligation, the latter must always prevail. Seeking guidance from a supervisor or the Internal Affairs Division, if unsure about reporting obligations, is also a crucial step in ensuring proper conduct. Question 8. The efficiency study reveals that certain Atlanta Police Department APD precincts are operating with significantly higher resource utilization rates compared to others, suggesting potential for reallocation to improve overall departmental efficiency. Considering the ethical obligations of the APD to ensure equitable service delivery across all Atlanta communities, which of the following approaches best navigates this situation? Option A. Immediately reallocate resources from lower utilization precincts to higher utilization precincts, as indicated by the efficiency study, to maximize operational efficiency. Option B. Disregard the efficiency study's findings, citing the paramount importance of maintaining current resource levels in all precincts to avoid any perceived disruption in service. Option C. Conduct a thorough review of the efficiency study's findings, cross-referencing them with community needs assessments and established equitable service delivery benchmarks to inform a balanced resource allocation strategy. Option D. Base resource reallocation decisions primarily on the perceived political influence of precinct representatives and community feedback, independent of the efficiency study's data. The correct answer is C. Conduct a thorough review of the efficiency study's findings, cross-referencing them with community needs assessments and established equitable service delivery benchmarks to inform a balanced resource allocation strategy. Explanation. The efficiency study reveals a potential conflict between departmental resource allocation and the ethical imperative to provide equitable services across all Atlanta Police Department APD precincts. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the practical needs of operational efficiency, as identified by the study, with the fundamental ethical obligation to ensure all citizens receive consistent and fair police protection, regardless of their precinct's perceived resource demands. Making a decision based solely on efficiency metrics, without considering the broader ethical implications, could lead to disparities in public safety and erode community trust. The best professional approach involves a comprehensive review that integrates the efficiency study's findings with an assessment of community needs and equitable service delivery standards. This approach is correct because it upholds the APD's commitment to serving all citizens fairly and effectively. It acknowledges the data from the efficiency study, but contextualizes it within the department's ethical framework and the principle of equitable resource distribution. This ensures that any proposed changes are data-informed but ethically sound, prioritizing public safety and trust over purely quantitative measures. This aligns with the core ethical duties of law enforcement to protect and serve all members of the community without prejudice. An approach that prioritizes reallocating resources solely based on the efficiency study's recommendations, without further ethical and needs-based analysis, is professionally unacceptable. This fails to consider the potential negative impact on precincts that might be deemed less efficient, but still require adequate resources to maintain public safety and respond to community needs. Such a decision would violate the ethical principle of fairness and could lead to unequal protection under the law, undermining the APD's legitimacy. Another professionally unacceptable approach is to ignore the efficiency study entirely, dismissing its findings without a thorough review. This demonstrates a lack of responsiveness to data that could potentially improve departmental operations and resource management. While ethical considerations are paramount, ignoring valid data can lead to continued inefficiencies and missed opportunities for better service delivery, which is also an ethical failing in terms of responsible stewardship of public resources. Finally, an approach that involves making resource allocation decisions based on political pressure or anecdotal evidence, rather than a systematic, data-driven, and ethically grounded process, is also professionally unsound. This bypasses the objective analysis required for fair and effective policing and can lead to decisions that are not in the best interest of public safety or community well-being. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the data and its implications, then critically evaluates these implications against established ethical principles and departmental mandates. This involves seeking diverse perspectives, considering potential consequences for all stakeholders, and ensuring transparency in the decision-making process. Question 9. Market research demonstrates that public safety concerns are paramount in Atlanta, Georgia. An Atlanta Police Department APD officer is investigating a credible tip regarding potential criminal activity involving a suspect's mobile phone. The officer believes the phone contains crucial evidence. What is the most appropriate and legally sound method for the APD to obtain access to the electronic communications data on the suspect's phone? Option A. Contact the mobile service provider and request the data based on the officer's suspicion of criminal activity. Option B. Access the data directly from the phone without any legal process, assuming the phone was lawfully seized. Option C. Request consent from the suspect to search the phone without explicitly informing them of their right to refuse. Option D. Obtain a warrant based on probable cause from a neutral and detached magistrate. The correct answer is D. Obtain a warrant based on probable cause from a neutral and detached magistrate. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need for information to address a potential public safety threat with the strict privacy rights afforded to individuals under Georgia law, specifically the Georgia Electronic Communications Privacy Act, (GEPCA). Law enforcement officers must act decisively when investigating crimes, but must also operate within the legal boundaries designed to protect citizens' digital communications. The pressure to obtain evidence quickly can lead to shortcuts that violate these rights, necessitating careful judgment and adherence to established legal procedures. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves obtaining a warrant based on probable cause from a neutral and detached magistrate. This approach aligns directly with the protections guaranteed by the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution and further elaborated by state-specific statutes like the GEPCA. A warrant ensures that the intrusion into an individual's digital life is justified by specific, articulable facts demonstrating criminal activity, thereby safeguarding against arbitrary searches and seizures. This process respects individual privacy while still allowing law enforcement to gather necessary evidence for public safety. Incorrect approach is analysis. Seeking consent from the individual without informing them of their right to refuse consent or the potential for a warrant is ethically problematic and may render any obtained information inadmissible. While consent can be a valid basis for a search, it must be freely and voluntarily given, and the individual must be aware of their rights. Failing to inform them of their right to refuse consent undermines the voluntariness of the agreement. Accessing the data without any legal process, even if the device was lawfully seized, is a direct violation of GEPCA and the Fourth Amendment. The GEPCA explicitly outlines the requirements for accessing electronic communications data, which generally necessitates a warrant or a court order. Circumventing these legal safeguards constitutes an unlawful search and seizure. Contacting the service provider and requesting the data based on a mere suspicion or a general inquiry, without a court order or warrant, is also a violation. Service providers are bound by privacy laws and cannot release subscriber information or communication content without proper legal authorization, except in very specific exigent circumstances that are not present here. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance and ethical conduct. This involves understanding the specific legal requirements of the jurisdiction, in this case, Georgia's GEPCA and federal constitutional protections. Assessing the nature of the information sought and the potential privacy implications, and always seeking the least intrusive means to achieve legitimate investigative goals. When dealing with digital evidence, the default should be to pursue a warrant unless specific. Narrowly defined exigent circumstances clearly justify an alternative, legally permissible course of action. Question 10. The control framework reveals that the Atlanta Police Department APD is considering a significant investment in new advanced surveillance technology for a high-crime precinct. To justify this expenditure, APD needs to demonstrate a clear return on investment. If the projected annual cost of the new technology, including maintenance and training, is $500,000, and the estimated annual reduction in direct operational costs, e.g., overtime for patrols, investigation hours, due to improved crime deterrence and faster incident response is $750,000. What is the projected annual net benefit of implementing this technology? Option A. A projected annual net benefit of $750,000. Option B. A projected annual net benefit of $250,000. Option C. A projected annual net benefit of $500,000. Option D. A projected annual net benefit of $250,000. The correct answer is B. A projected annual net benefit of $250,000. Explanation. The control framework reveals a scenario that is professionally challenging due to the inherent tension between resource allocation for immediate operational needs and the long-term strategic benefits of proactive crime prevention initiatives. The Atlanta Police Department, APD, operates under strict budgetary constraints, requiring officers to make critical decisions about how to best utilize limited resources to maximize public safety. This specific situation demands a data-driven approach to justify resource deployment, ensuring accountability and effectiveness in line with APD's operational guidelines and the principles of efficient public service. The best professional practice involves a rigorous impact assessment that quantifies the potential reduction in crime incidents and the associated resource savings, e.g., reduced response times, fewer investigations, resulting from the proposed technology. This approach aligns with APD's commitment to evidence-based policing and fiscal responsibility. By projecting the return on investment (ROI) through a detailed cost-benefit analysis, the department can demonstrate to stakeholders that the expenditure on advanced surveillance technology is a strategic decision that will yield measurable improvements in public safety and operational efficiency. This method ensures that resource allocation is not arbitrary, but is grounded in a clear understanding of anticipated outcomes, thereby fulfilling the department's duty to serve the citizens of Atlanta effectively and transparently. An approach that focuses solely on the perceived immediate need for enhanced surveillance without a quantitative assessment of its impact is professionally deficient. This failure to quantify benefits and costs means that the decision is not grounded in data, making it difficult to justify the expenditure to oversight bodies or the public. It risks misallocating funds that could be used for other critical services or more proven crime reduction strategies. Another professionally unacceptable approach is to prioritize the acquisition of the most technologically advanced system available without considering its specific applicability to Atlanta's crime patterns or its integration with existing APD infrastructure. This can lead to an inefficient use of resources, as the technology may be underutilized or require significant additional investment for customization and training, ultimately failing to deliver the projected benefits. A third flawed approach involves relying on anecdotal evidence or the opinions of a few officers regarding the technology's potential effectiveness. While officer input is valuable, it does not substitute for a systematic, data-driven impact assessment. Decisions impacting departmental budgets and public safety should be based on objective analysis rather than subjective impressions, ensuring that resources are allocated based on demonstrable need and projected outcomes. The professional decision-making process for such situations should involve a structured impact assessment framework. This framework typically includes defining clear objectives for the proposed initiative, identifying key performance indicators, KPI to measure success, collecting relevant data e.g., crime statistics, operational costs, developing a cost-benefit model, and projecting the expected ROI. This systematic process ensures that decisions are informed, defensible, and aligned with the department's strategic goals and fiscal responsibilities. Question 11. The control framework reveals that Officer Miller of the Atlanta Police Department receives an anonymous tip alleging that a specific vehicle, matching the description of Mr. Henderson's car, is being used to transport stolen goods within Atlanta. The tip provides a general location and a time frame. Considering the principles of impact assessment and the legal requirements for law enforcement action in Georgia, what is the most appropriate initial course of action for Officer Miller? Option A. Discreetly observe the described vehicle and its occupants in the specified area to gather further information and attempt to corroborate the tip before taking any further action. Option B. Ignore the tip as it is from an anonymous source and therefore unreliable. Option C. Contact Mr. Henderson directly to question him about the allegations without any prior independent verification. Option D. Immediately stop Mr. Henderson's vehicle and conduct a search based solely on the anonymous tip. The correct answer is A. Discreetly observe the described vehicle and its occupants in the specified area to gather further information and attempt to corroborate the tip before taking any further action. Explanation. The control framework reveals a scenario where an Atlanta Police Department APD Officer Miller has received information about potential illegal activity from an anonymous tip. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the imperative to investigate potential crimes with the fundamental rights of individuals and the established procedures for obtaining evidence. The APD operates under Georgia state law and federal constitutional principles, which dictate strict guidelines on searches and seizures. The challenge lies in determining the appropriate course of action based on limited, uncorroborated information without infringing upon civil liberties or compromising the integrity of a potential investigation. The best professional practice in this situation involves a methodical approach to information gathering and verification before taking any action that could infringe upon an individual's rights. This includes attempting to corroborate the anonymous tip through independent means, such as discreet surveillance or checking public records, to establish probable cause or reasonable suspicion. If sufficient corroboration is obtained, the officer can then proceed with seeking appropriate legal authorization, such as a search warrant, or taking other lawful investigative steps. This approach aligns with the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution and Georgia law, which require probable cause for searches and seizures, and emphasize the importance of judicial oversight. It ensures that law enforcement actions are based on objective facts rather than mere suspicion or unsubstantiated allegation, thereby protecting citizens' rights and maintaining public trust. An approach that involves immediate action based solely on the anonymous tip, without any independent verification, is professionally unacceptable. This would constitute a violation of the Fourth Amendment's probable cause requirement and potentially Georgia's specific statutes governing searches and seizures. Acting on an uncorroborated tip can lead to unlawful stops, searches, and arrests, exposing the APD to civil liability and undermining the credibility of law enforcement. Another unacceptable approach is to dismiss the tip entirely without any attempt at verification. While anonymous tips alone may not always establish probable cause, they can serve as a starting point for investigation. Ignoring such information without due diligence could mean missing an opportunity to prevent or solve a crime, which is also a failure in professional duty. Furthermore, attempting to solicit further information from the anonymous tipster in a manner that could reveal their identity or lead to retaliation would be ethically and legally problematic, potentially endangering the informant and violating privacy concerns. Professional decision-making in such situations should follow a framework that prioritizes legal compliance, ethical conduct, and effective policing. This involves 1. Assessing the nature and source of the information. 2. Understanding the relevant legal standards, e.g., probable cause, reasonable suspicion. 3. Exploring all lawful avenues for corroborating the information. 4. Consulting with supervisors or legal advisors when in doubt. And 5. Taking action only when legally and ethically justified, with appropriate documentation. Question 12. The control framework reveals that Officer Miller of the Atlanta Police Department receives an anonymous tip alleging a specific vehicle is being used for drug transactions in a known high-crime area. Considering the legal standards governing police action in Georgia, which of the following represents the most appropriate initial course of action for Officer Miller? Option A. Disregard the anonymous tip entirely, as such information is inherently unreliable and cannot form the basis for any police action. Option B. Immediately stop the vehicle and question the occupants based solely on the information provided by the anonymous tip. Option C. Conduct discreet surveillance of the described vehicle and its occupants to observe for any suspicious behavior that corroborates the tip before taking further action. Option D. Initiate a full search of the vehicle based on the anonymous tip, believing it provides sufficient grounds for such action. The correct answer is C. Conduct discreet surveillance of the described vehicle and its occupants to observe for any suspicious behavior that corroborates the tip before taking further action. Explanation. The control framework reveals a scenario where an Atlanta Police Department APD Officer Miller has received information about potential illegal activity from an anonymous tip. This situation is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the need to investigate potential crimes with the imperative to uphold individual rights and adhere to strict legal procedures. The APD operates under Georgia law and federal constitutional principles, which govern the limits of police action based on anonymous tips. Careful judgment is required to avoid overstepping boundaries that could lead to the suppression of evidence or civil liability. The best professional practice in this scenario involves a measured approach that prioritizes corroboration of the anonymous tip before taking any intrusive action. This means Officer Miller should attempt to independently verify the details provided in the tip through his own observations or other reliable sources. For example, if the tip alleges a specific vehicle is involved in drug sales, Officer Miller should look for that vehicle in the described location and observe its occupant's behavior for any suspicious activity that aligns with the tip. This approach is correct because it aligns with the Fourth Amendment's protection against unreasonable searches and seizures, as interpreted by numerous Supreme Court decisions. An anonymous tip by itself generally lacks the probable cause or reasonable suspicion necessary to justify a stop or search. Corroboration provides the objective facts needed to establish a legal basis for further investigation. An approach that involves immediately stopping the described vehicle and questioning the occupants based solely on the anonymous tip is professionally unacceptable. This fails to meet the legal standard for a lawful investigatory stop, which requires reasonable suspicion that criminal activity is afoot. Relying solely on an uncorroborated anonymous tip violates this standard and could lead to an unlawful detention. Another professionally unacceptable approach would be to immediately search the vehicle based on the anonymous tip. This is a more intrusive action than a stop and requires a higher legal standard, typically probable cause. An anonymous tip, without independent corroboration, does not provide probable cause for a vehicle search. Finally, an approach that involves ignoring the tip entirely without any attempt at verification would also be professionally deficient. While the tip may not be sufficient on its own, responsible policing involves assessing all available information. A complete disregard without any preliminary assessment could mean missing an opportunity to investigate legitimate criminal activity. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve a tiered approach to information assessment. First, evaluate the source and nature of the information. Second, determine the legal standard required for any proposed action, e.g., reasonable suspicion for a stop, probable cause for a search. Third, identify steps that can be taken to corroborate or refute the information without infringing on constitutional rights. Fourth, act only when the information, combined with independent observations, meets the necessary legal threshold. Question 13. The assessment process reveals that Officer Miller has been accused of using excessive force during a recent arrest. The citizen complaint has been filed, and the Atlanta Police Department, APD, must initiate an impact assessment to determine the appropriate course of action. Considering APD policies and Georgia law, which of the following investigative approaches best addresses the situation? Option A. Place Officer Miller on immediate administrative leave and initiate disciplinary proceedings based solely on the citizen's accusation, pending a full investigation. Option B. Conduct a thorough and impartial investigation, gathering all relevant evidence including witness statements, body-worn camera footage, and the officer's report to determine if the force used was objectively reasonable and in compliance with APD policy and Georgia law. Option C. Accept Officer Miller's written report as the definitive account of the incident and close the investigation without further inquiry. Option D. Immediately dismiss the complaint, citing Officer Miller's exemplary record and numerous commendations, as it is unlikely he would engage in misconduct. The correct answer is B. Conduct a thorough and impartial investigation, gathering all relevant evidence including witness statements, body-worn camera footage, and the officer's report to determine if the force used was objectively reasonable and in compliance with APD policy and Georgia law. Explanation. The assessment process reveals a scenario where an Atlanta Police Department, APD, Officer Miller, has received a citizen complaint alleging excessive force during an arrest. This situation is professionally challenging because it involves balancing the need for thorough investigation with the officer's right to due process and the department's commitment to public trust and accountability. The APD must navigate potential biases, ensure fairness to all parties, and uphold departmental policies and Georgia law regarding use of force in citizen complaints. The best approach involves a comprehensive and impartial investigation that adheres strictly to APD policy and Georgia law. This means gathering all available evidence, including witness statements, body-worn camera footage, and the officer's report, without prejudgment. The investigation should focus on whether the force used was objectively reasonable under the circumstances, as defined by departmental policy and legal precedent, and whether all procedural steps were followed. This approach is correct because it aligns with the APD's duty to investigate all complaints thoroughly and fairly, ensuring that actions are judged against established standards of conduct and legal requirements. It upholds public trust by demonstrating a commitment to accountability and transparency, while also respecting the rights of the officer involved. An approach that dismisses the complaint solely based on the officer's prior commendations is professionally unacceptable. Prior positive performance does not negate the possibility of misconduct in a specific incident and can create an appearance of bias or favoritism, undermining the integrity of the investigation. Another professionally unacceptable approach is to rely solely on the officer's written report without corroborating evidence or independent review. This fails to provide an objective assessment of the incident and neglects the citizen's perspective, potentially leading to an unjust outcome and eroding public confidence in the APD's investigative processes. Furthermore, an approach that immediately suspends the officer without a preliminary investigation or due process is also professionally unsound. While swift action may seem appropriate, it bypasses established procedures and could be seen as punitive rather than investigative, potentially violating departmental policy and the officer's rights. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes impartiality, evidence-based analysis, and adherence to established policies and legal standards. This involves a structured investigative process, objective evaluation of facts, and consideration of all relevant perspectives before reaching a conclusion. Question 14. Analysis of a developing public safety concern in Atlanta, Georgia, requires officers to consider the most effective and responsible method for informing the community while adhering to APD protocols and Georgia state law. Which approach best balances the need for timely information with the imperative of accuracy and investigative integrity? Option A. Immediately post preliminary details and officer observations directly to departmental social media pages to alert the public as quickly as possible. Option B. Withhold all information from the public until the investigation is fully concluded and all potential suspects have been identified and apprehended. Option C. Coordinate with the APD Public Information Officer and relevant investigative units to develop and release an official statement through approved channels, ensuring all information is verified and strategically communicated. Option D. Share initial findings and concerns with trusted community leaders and neighborhood watch groups to solicit their assistance in managing public perception. The correct answer is C. Coordinate with the APD Public Information Officer and relevant investigative units to develop and release an official statement through approved channels, ensuring all information is verified and strategically communicated. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between the need for swift action to address potential public safety threats and the requirement to adhere to established departmental protocols and legal boundaries. Officers must exercise sound judgment to balance immediate response with due process and the protection of individual rights, especially when dealing with sensitive information and potential community impact. The specific context of the Atlanta Police Department, APD, necessitates adherence to Georgia state laws and APD internal policies regarding information dissemination and public engagement. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a multifaceted approach that prioritizes accurate information verification and controlled dissemination through official channels. This approach ensures that information released to the public is factual, minimizes the risk of misinformation or panic, and maintains the integrity of ongoing investigations. It aligns with APD's commitment to transparency, while upholding legal and ethical standards for law enforcement communication. Specifically, this involves coordinating with the APD Public Information Officer, PO, and relevant investigative units to craft a carefully worded statement that addresses community concerns without compromising operational security or individual privacy. Adhering to Georgia's Open Records Act and APD's media relations policy. Incorrect approach is analysis. Releasing unverified information directly to social media platforms or local news outlets without official clearance is a significant ethical and regulatory failure. This bypasses established protocols for information control, potentially leading to the spread of rumors, jeopardizing investigations, and eroding public trust. It violates APD's media relations policy, which mandates that all public statements be coordinated through the PIO. Sharing preliminary or speculative details with community leaders or informal networks before official verification and release is also problematic. While well-intentioned, this can lead to the information being misinterpreted or prematurely acted upon by those outside the official investigative process. It risks creating confusion and undermining the APD's controlled communication strategy, potentially violating principles of fairness and due process if individuals are implicated without proper investigation. Delaying any communication to the public indefinitely, even when there is a clear public interest or potential for concern, can also be detrimental. This can foster speculation and distrust, leading the public to seek information from unreliable sources. While caution is necessary, a complete lack of communication can be perceived as a lack of transparency and responsiveness, failing to meet the community's need for information within legal and ethical boundaries. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the core issue and its potential impact. Next, they must consult relevant departmental policies and state laws, in this case, Georgia law and APD policies, to understand the procedural requirements and ethical obligations. This is followed by assessing the urgency of the situation and the potential consequences of different actions. Finally, professionals should seek guidance from supervisors or designated experts, like the PIO, to ensure their chosen course of action is both effective and compliant. Question 15. The review process indicates a potential unauthorized access to a database containing sensitive citizen information by an APD officer. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action for the officer's supervisor to ensure compliance with Atlanta Police Department policies and Georgia privacy laws? Option A. Allow the officer to continue accessing the data if they claim it is necessary for an ongoing investigation, pending a later review of their actions. Option B. Initiate a formal, documented investigation into the alleged unauthorized access, immediately securing the relevant data logs and interviewing the officer involved, while consulting APD's data privacy policy and relevant sections of the Official Code of Georgia annotated concerning data protection. Option C. Report the incident to the IT department for a technical review, but take no immediate action regarding the officer or data access until a formal complaint is filed. Option D. Instruct the officer to immediately delete any accessed information and verbally warn them against future unauthorized access, assuming the information was not misused. The correct answer is B. Initiate a formal, documented investigation into the alleged unauthorized access, immediately securing the relevant data logs and interviewing the officer involved, while consulting APD's data privacy policy and relevant sections of the Official Code of Georgia annotated concerning data protection. Explanation. The review process indicates a potential breach of privacy and data security protocols within the Atlanta Police Department, APD, concerning the handling of sensitive citizen information. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need for information with the imperative to uphold legal and ethical standards governing data privacy, specifically under Georgia law and APD policy. Missteps can lead to severe legal repercussions, erosion of public trust, and internal disciplinary action. The best approach involves a thorough, documented assessment of the data's sensitivity, the purpose of its access, and the authorization of personnel involved, strictly adhering to APD's established data handling policies and Georgia's privacy statutes. This ensures that any access or use of citizen information is lawful, necessary, and proportionate, minimizing the risk of unauthorized disclosure or misuse. This method prioritizes compliance and safeguards individual rights, aligning with the APD's commitment to responsible data stewardship. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with accessing or disseminating the information without a clear, documented justification that aligns with APD policy and Georgia law. This could involve assuming authorization or expediency over due diligence, thereby risking a violation of privacy rights. Another flawed approach is to ignore the potential breach and take no action, which fails to address the identified risk and could allow a violation to persist or escalate. Lastly, attempting to rectify the situation through informal or undocumented means, such as verbal instructions or ad hoc data deletion, bypasses necessary oversight and accountability mechanisms, potentially creating further compliance issues. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making process that begins with identifying the potential issue, consulting relevant policies and legal frameworks, APD policy, Georgia O. C.G. A. Title 10, Chapter 1, Article 25, Identity Theft and Related Privacy Provisions, assessing the risk, documenting all actions and decisions, and seeking guidance from supervisors or legal counsel when uncertainty exists. This systematic approach ensures that actions are legally sound, ethically defensible, and in line with departmental standards. Question 16. Performance analysis shows a pattern of potential threats being reported to the Atlanta Police Department, APD. In a recent instance, a credible-sounding but unconfirmed report of a significant public safety risk has been received. What is the most appropriate initial course of action for the APD to take to manage this situation effectively and responsibly, in accordance with its operational guidelines? Option A. Deploy all available patrol units and specialized response teams to the reported location to neutralize the perceived threat as quickly as possible. Option B. Initiate a preliminary information gathering phase to define the scope and potential severity of the threat, followed by a structured impact assessment before committing to significant public alerts or resource allocation. Option C. Immediately issue a broad public alert to all residents within a wide radius of the reported incident to ensure maximum awareness and preparedness. Option D. Focus solely on verifying the physical details of the threat and disregard any potential secondary impacts on community morale or civil liberties until the primary threat is confirmed. The correct answer is B. Initiate a preliminary information gathering phase to define the scope and potential severity of the threat, followed by a structured impact assessment before committing to significant public alerts or resource allocation. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need for information to address a potential public safety threat with the imperative to conduct a thorough and unbiased impact assessment. The pressure to act quickly can lead to premature conclusions or the overlooking of critical data, potentially compromising the integrity of the assessment and leading to misallocation of resources or unjustified public alarm. The APD's commitment to evidence-based decision-making, as outlined in its internal procedural guidelines, necessitates a structured and objective approach. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves initiating a preliminary information gathering phase to establish the scope and potential severity of the reported threat, followed by a structured impact assessment. This structured approach ensures that all relevant factors are considered systematically. The preliminary gathering phase allows for the identification of key stakeholders, potential data sources, and the initial parameters of the threat. Subsequently, the impact assessment would involve collecting and analyzing data related to the potential consequences across various domains, e.g., public safety, infrastructure, community trust, without making definitive judgments until sufficient evidence is compiled. This aligns with APD's commitment to thoroughness and data integrity in its operational planning and response protocols, ensuring that actions are proportionate and well-informed. Incorrect approach is analysis. Initiating immediate, widespread public alerts based solely on an unverified report, without a preliminary assessment of its credibility or potential impact, represents a failure to adhere to APD's established protocols for information dissemination. This approach risks causing unnecessary panic and eroding public trust if the threat proves to be unfounded. Proceeding directly to resource allocation for a full-scale response without first conducting any form of impact assessment, even a preliminary one, is a significant ethical and procedural lapse. This bypasses the critical step of understanding the nature and scale of the problem, leading to potentially wasteful or misdirected deployment of personnel and equipment, and failing to meet the APD's duty of responsible resource management. Focusing exclusively on the immediate physical threat and neglecting to consider the broader community impact, such as potential civil liberties concerns or the psychological effects on residents, demonstrates a narrow and incomplete assessment. APD's mandate includes maintaining public order and safety, which encompasses a holistic view of community well-being, requiring consideration of all potential ramifications. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such situations should employ a phased approach. First, acknowledge the report and initiate immediate but contained verification steps. Second, define the scope of the potential impact and identify necessary data points for assessment. Third, conduct the impact assessment systematically, considering all relevant domains. Fourth, based on the assessed impact, determine the appropriate response, including communication strategies and resource deployment. This structured decision-making process ensures that actions are both timely and judicious, grounded in evidence, and aligned with departmental responsibilities and ethical obligations. Question 17. The risk matrix shows a potential for a moderate likelihood of a low-impact data breach affecting citizen privacy within the Atlanta Police Department (APD. Considering the implications for public trust and compliance with Georgia state law regarding data protection, which of the following actions represents the most responsible and effective initial response? Option A. Immediately focus all available resources on technically containing the breach and resolving the underlying vulnerability, deferring any assessment of impact or notification until the technical issue is fully resolved. Option B. Conduct a detailed impact assessment to identify the scope of the breach, the types of data compromised, and the number of individuals affected, and use this to inform a tailored incident response and notification plan. Option C. Prioritize notifying the public and media about the potential breach to demonstrate transparency, even before a clear understanding of the breach's scope or impact is established internally. Option D. Issue a broad public statement acknowledging a potential security incident without specific details, while simultaneously initiating a limited internal review to determine if any citizen data was actually accessed. The correct answer is B. Conduct a detailed impact assessment to identify the scope of the breach, the types of data compromised, and the number of individuals affected, and use this to inform a tailored incident response and notification plan. Explanation. The risk matrix shows a potential for a moderate likelihood of a low-impact data breach affecting citizen privacy within the Atlanta Police Department (APD). This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate operational needs of the APD with the long-term imperative of protecting sensitive citizen data, as mandated by Georgia state law concerning data privacy and security. A hasty or incomplete response could lead to regulatory penalties, loss of public trust, and harm to individuals whose data is compromised. The best approach involves a comprehensive impact assessment that meticulously documents the potential data breach, identifies the specific types of sensitive information at risk, quantifies the potential number of individuals affected, and outlines the immediate and long-term consequences. This assessment should then inform a tailored incident response plan, prioritizing notification to affected individuals and relevant authorities as required by Georgia law, and detailing remediation steps to prevent recurrence. This aligns with the APD's duty to protect citizen data and comply with state regulations, ensuring a proportionate and effective response. An approach that focuses solely on immediate containment without a thorough assessment of the scope and impact is professionally unacceptable. This failure to understand the full extent of the breach could lead to inadequate remediation efforts, leaving vulnerabilities open and potentially violating Georgia's data breach notification requirements by not informing all necessary parties. Another professionally unacceptable approach is to delay notification to affected individuals and authorities while attempting to fully resolve the technical issue. While technical resolution is important, Georgia law mandates timely notification. An undue delay can result in further legal and ethical breaches, as well as increased harm to individuals. Finally, an approach that involves a superficial assessment and relies on generic, off-the-shelf response protocols without considering the specific context of the APD and the nature of the data involved is also flawed. This lack of specificity can lead to an ineffective response that fails to meet the unique requirements of the situation and the specific mandates of Georgia's data protection laws. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making process that begins with understanding the regulatory landscape, followed by a thorough assessment of the incident's potential impact, and then the development of a response plan that is both compliant and effective. This involves consulting relevant legal counsel, data privacy officers, and IT security experts to ensure all aspects of the incident are addressed appropriately. Question 18. Investigation of a recent burglary in Atlanta, Georgia, has led officers to a suspect's residence. During a consensual search of the premises, officers observe a laptop computer that they believe may contain evidence of the crime, including communication with accomplices and details of stolen property. What is the most appropriate course of action for the Atlanta Police Department officers to take regarding the laptop? Option A. Allow a civilian IT specialist, who is a friend of one of the officers and has expertise in computers, to access the laptop on site to quickly determine if it contains relevant evidence. Option B. Secure the laptop and immediately seek a search warrant from a judge based on the probable cause established during the consensual search of the residence. Option C. Delay the investigation until a later date to allow for the acquisition of a search warrant, even if it means the evidence might be lost or tampered with. Option D. Access the laptop immediately to review its contents, as the consensual search of the residence implies consent to search all items within. The correct answer is B. Secure the laptop and immediately seek a search warrant from a judge based on the probable cause established during the consensual search of the residence. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the sensitive nature of the information involved and the potential for misuse or unauthorized disclosure. Officers must balance the need for thorough investigation with the imperative to protect individual privacy and adhere to departmental policies and Georgia law regarding data access and handling. Careful judgment is required to ensure that investigative actions are both effective and legally compliant. The best approach involves obtaining the necessary legal authorization before accessing any electronic devices. This aligns with the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, which protects against unreasonable searches and seizures and requires probable cause for warrants. Specifically, Georgia law, like federal law, mandates that law enforcement officers must secure a warrant based on probable cause for searching electronic devices that contain personal data. This process ensures that the intrusion into an individual's privacy is justified and conducted under judicial oversight. Adhering to this procedure safeguards the integrity of the investigation by ensuring evidence is obtained legally and is admissible in court, while also respecting citizens' constitutional rights. Accessing the device without a warrant, even with the belief that it contains crucial evidence, constitutes a violation of constitutional rights and departmental policy. This bypasses the established legal safeguards designed to prevent arbitrary government intrusion. Such an action could lead to the suppression of any evidence found, jeopardizing the entire investigation and potentially exposing the department to civil liability. Delaying the investigation to obtain a warrant, while seemingly inefficient, is a necessary procedural step. The failure to do so, even with good intentions, undermines the legal framework governing searches and seizures. The investigation must proceed within the bounds of the law, and this includes respecting the warrant requirement for digital evidence. Sharing the device with a civilian IT specialist without proper authorization or supervision is also problematic. While civilian expertise can be valuable, it does not supersede legal requirements. Access to potentially sensitive data must be controlled and documented, and civilian involvement must be managed in a way that maintains chain of custody and prevents unauthorized access or disclosure. Adhering to APD policies on data handling and privacy, professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance and ethical conduct. This involves understanding the relevant constitutional protections and state laws, consulting with supervisors and legal counsel when in doubt, and meticulously following established departmental procedures for evidence collection and handling. The principle of innocent until proven guilty and the protection of individual liberties must guide every investigative step. Question 19. Comparative studies suggest that law enforcement agencies can improve their operational effectiveness through comprehensive impact assessments of their investigative methodologies. If the Atlanta Police Department, APD, is considering an external review of its procedures for handling sensitive evidence in ongoing investigations to assess potential impacts, what is the most appropriate and legally compliant approach to facilitate this assessment? Option A. The APD should refuse to share any information related to evidence handling and active investigations with external parties, citing broad privacy concerns and the need to protect ongoing cases, without seeking specific legal guidance on what can be shared. Option B. Departmental supervisors should provide informal verbal summaries of evidence handling practices to external consultants, without any written documentation or formal approval process for the information shared. Option C. The APD should formally request and obtain approval for the release of anonymized and aggregated data pertaining to evidence handling protocols from relevant internal units, ensuring that no personally identifiable information or details that could compromise ongoing investigations are disclosed to external consultants. Option D. External consultants should be granted direct access to raw, unredacted case files and evidence logs related to active investigations for their review, with a general understanding that they will maintain confidentiality. The correct answer is C. The APD should formally request and obtain approval for the release of anonymized and aggregated data pertaining to evidence handling protocols from relevant internal units, ensuring that no personally identifiable information or details that could compromise ongoing investigations are disclosed to external consultants. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need for information with the strict legal and ethical obligations of the Atlanta Police Department, APD, regarding the handling of sensitive investigative data. The APD operates under Georgia state law and federal regulations governing law enforcement investigations and data privacy. A critical aspect of this challenge is ensuring that any information sharing, even for the purpose of a broader impact assessment, does not compromise ongoing investigations, violate privacy rights, or exceed the department's statutory authority. Careful judgment is required to determine the appropriate scope and method of information dissemination. The best professional practice involves a structured, authorized approach to information dissemination for impact assessment. This means formally requesting and reviewing the relevant data through established departmental protocols, ensuring that only anonymized or aggregated data necessary for the assessment is shared, and that this sharing is conducted with the explicit approval of the relevant commanding officers and legal counsel. This approach is correct because it adheres to APD policies, Georgia's public records laws, which have specific exemptions for active investigations, and federal privacy regulations like the Privacy Act of 1974, if applicable. It prioritizes the integrity of ongoing investigations and the protection of individual privacy, while still allowing for necessary departmental analysis. Sharing raw, unredacted data with external consultants without proper authorization or anonymization is professionally unacceptable. This failure constitutes a significant breach of investigative confidentiality and privacy rights, potentially jeopardizing ongoing cases and exposing the department to legal liability under Georgia law. Furthermore, it bypasses established departmental review processes designed to safeguard sensitive information. Another professionally unacceptable approach is to deny all access to information, even for internal impact assessment purposes, citing only general privacy concerns without a specific legal basis for withholding. While privacy is paramount, a complete refusal can hinder legitimate departmental oversight and improvement initiatives. It may not align with APD's obligations to conduct necessary internal reviews and analyses. Finally, relying solely on informal verbal agreements with external parties to handle sensitive data is a grave ethical and regulatory failure. This lack of documentation and formal oversight creates a high risk of data misuse, unauthorized disclosure, and a complete breakdown of accountability, violating principles of responsible data stewardship and departmental integrity. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the specific objective of the information request, e.g., impact assessment. This should be followed by a thorough review of applicable APD policies, Georgia state statutes, and any relevant federal laws. Consultation with the APD legal advisor and the relevant commanding officers is crucial to determine the appropriate level of data access, necessary redaction, and the formal approval process for any information sharing. The principle of least privilege should guide data access, meaning only the minimum necessary information should be shared, and only with authorized personnel under strict conditions. Question 20. The investigation demonstrates that Officer Miller, while processing a significant seizure of electronics and jewelry in Atlanta, Georgia, needs to accurately account for the value of these assets for potential forfeiture proceedings. The total estimated street value of the seized items is $50,000. Officer Miller obtains professional appraisals for the jewelry, totaling $25,000, and the electronics are valued by a certified appraiser at $20,000. The department's policy requires a formal appraisal for any seized item valued over $1,000. If the total expenses incurred for appraisals and secure storage of these assets amount to $1,500, and the net proceeds from the eventual sale of these assets are to be calculated for departmental use, as per Georgia law. What is the net value of the seized assets after accounting for appraisal and storage costs? Option A, $50,000. Option B, $48,500. Option C, $45,000. Option D, $43,500. The correct answer is D, $43,500. Explanation. The investigation demonstrates a scenario where a law enforcement officer, Officer Miller, is tasked with managing seized assets in Atlanta, Georgia, which involves significant financial and procedural responsibilities. The challenge lies in accurately valuing and accounting for these assets to ensure compliance with Georgia's forfeiture laws and departmental policies, thereby preventing potential legal challenges and maintaining public trust. The need for precise financial record-keeping and adherence to established protocols is paramount. The best approach involves a meticulous, multi-step process that prioritizes accuracy and legal compliance. This begins with the immediate, detailed inventory and secure storage of all seized items, followed by obtaining professional appraisals for items exceeding a certain value threshold, as often stipulated by departmental policy or state law for evidentiary purposes and fair market value determination. All transactions, including appraisal costs and any subsequent sale proceeds, must be meticulously documented in a dedicated ledger, cross-referenced with official seizure reports. This ledger should be reconciled regularly with departmental financial records and audited periodically. This methodical approach ensures transparency, accountability, and adherence to Georgia's official Code of Georgia Annotated O.C.G. Title 19, Chapter 11, Disposition of Property and relevant Atlanta Police Department General Orders regarding property and evidence management. An incorrect approach would be to rely solely on the estimated street value provided by arresting officers for all seized items, without obtaining formal appraisals for higher value items. This fails to establish a legally defensible fair market value, potentially leading to disputes during forfeiture proceedings and violating O.C.G. Section 19-11-10, which mandates proper valuation for forfeiture. Another incorrect approach would be to deposit all sale proceeds directly into a general departmental operating fund without proper segregation and detailed accounting for each specific forfeiture case. This practice bypasses the strict accounting requirements for seized assets and could be construed as commingling funds, violating O.C.G. Section 19-11-11, which outlines the disposition of forfeited property and proceeds. Finally, failing to maintain a comprehensive, auditable ledger of all seized assets, their valuation, and subsequent disposition, including any associated expenses, represents a significant procedural and ethical lapse, undermining the integrity of the forfeiture process and potentially violating departmental audit requirements. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that emphasizes due diligence, strict adherence to established protocols, and a commitment to transparency. This involves understanding the specific legal requirements of Georgia's forfeiture laws, consulting departmental policies for detailed procedural guidance, and prioritizing accurate financial record-keeping at every stage. When in doubt about valuation or procedural steps, seeking guidance from supervisors, the department's legal counsel, or evidence custodians is crucial.